Hello, I am the next speaker. My name is Emily Wade, and I am working as a landscape architect in an office in Stockholm, Sweden, called Landskapslaget. And I very much enjoyed listening to you, Einar, because we met, I think, the first time about 6 years ago when you were seeing all these problems or issues coming up about recreation and tourism, really using the landscape. And what you've showed now, still you have a different kind of preparedness for these issues. So things do happen, but they do take a little time. Okay, so my perspective, you could say, is going to the urban setting. As an office with urban design and landscape planning and architecture, this is where a lot of the issues that we are fighting with happen. It's about urbanization, the fact that a lot of people are coming in to towns. This is a global trend, of course, but we are dealing with this very practically every day in the office. This picture that I'm showing you is taken from the development plans for Gothenburg. Gothenburg is the second biggest city in Sweden. And what you see here is the river of Göta älv, which connects a big lake, Vänern, to the sea. And the reason why Göteborg or Gothenburg was even built here was because it was a very strategic place for trade. And we had some very good help of Dutch, making sure that there would be a town here. In fact, this is a place which might not be the best place to build a city, because it's old marshland and it's very influenced by the water. And at the same time, you can see how all these blue areas here is where Gothenburg is planning to extend. So there's a big challenge with the water still and the urbanization. Another image is from Stockholm. Recently, for the last 10, 20 years, we've seen an enormous development in many of the areas which used to be industrial areas. And what we've also seen is that in the need for this dense, cozy town, we are maybe not thinking all the different uses and perspectives. So this is actually two articles from putting the focus on that the parks that we are planning in new areas are not big enough, because these areas will be full of families and children, and there's not a holistic idea of the way we distribute spaces. So the issue of how we decide what sizes of spaces we need in the city is very, very kind of urgent issue in many Swedish cities. So the children are one very important group that have been obviously sort of put aside a little in the densification. Another challenge that we have is there space for green? We can see today that a tree, say if we want to plant an oak or a big ash tree, it takes some space. And when we make the streets narrow and the park smaller, it's even difficult to have enough space to make big trees grow. So, as we've also heard in the previous sessions, there's a really urgent climate pressure. So we, at the same time as we're facing all this urbanization, we need to also accommodate the possibility of having a good biodiversity and being prepared for the climatic changes that we're facing. You who are not from Scandinavia, I'm not sure if you know this guy. This is Johan Rockström. He's been connected to a research center called Stockholm Resilience Center, and he was very early in putting a lot of the facts together, showing the the way we were going with climate change. So what I thought is I'll give you some examples of how we try to prepare ourselves for these challenges. I'll start off by how we build capacity in the organizations or in the profession where we work as landscape architects and urban planners. Since several years, my office, Landskapslaget, have been working with a bottom-up approach that's landed in a kind of mission, vision, and now it's kind of giving us direction for sustainability. And it's, in Swedish, it's called det allmänna först, and in English, put the common first. So that's very suitable for today's subject. What this has done is it's been helping us to create a framework to keep, well, actually what it's doing, this thinking of put the common first, you say, is to create a framework so we can continue this contact we need with natural elements, with each other. We can see that if people are given a fair chance to participate, they will also contribute. And the power of the many and the brains of the many are often better than of the few, as we also heard Anita here with the more complex world we're living in. The ecological services are included in the design, and people can express their cultural specificity. So from an office, we've been developing both kind of place-making activities in the area where we're working, trying to engage the public and politicians to discuss subjects which are very much in need to discuss. Just the other week, we had something we call lunchskap. It means you meet over lunch, and it's in the landscape, and we kind of merge it. And right now in Stockholm, for example, the death of the nightclubs in the city and the cultural venues has been a very big issue. So this was, how does culture take place in the city? But we've also developed, and this is part of the capacity building, a kind of internal encyclopedia on how to work with different methods, different aspects you should consider as an office. Then I thought I'd show you just a few of the examples that we can see around that we are working with around Sweden. And one is not one of our projects, but it's connected to Gothenburg that I showed you an image of earlier. As you might remember on this map, there was a huge amount of buildings being constructed next to the river. And these are areas which haven't been used before. Well, they've been used as an industrial site, but they haven't been, people haven't had, a large number of people haven't had a relationship to this. So in the city of Gothenburg, and a company that works with development, been having a very, very interesting process for, I don't know how many years now, maybe 8 years, 10 years, where they've tried prototyping new urban spaces and new functions in these areas. There's been a lot of workshops, many people coming both from the profession of landscape architects and architects, but also with a lot of people from Gothenburg trying to program this. What do we need and what do we want? This is one of the examples of a temporary construction, which many people have hoped to be permanent. It's a sauna drawn by Raumlabo, or something like that in German. So Frihamnen, which is what you might have seen on the program, is this place. It's part of the project there. But another very practical and interesting way of finding participation is a project we've been working on in Stockholm. It's an area called Rinkeby. Rinkeby is on the outskirts of Stockholm, and it has a very mixed and young, the inhabitants are very young. It's also, unfortunately, part of town which has sometimes bad reputation. But through working with the children and working with especially young girls, as this, which is a temporary office for architects, we are kind of we're sparking the idea that you can influence your surroundings, and also there's a lot of responsibility that's being kind of, people are becoming empowered and feel ownership for what's the development that's going on in this area. Another thing that we're working with is the carrying capacity and adaptation to these climatic changes and to the dense population. We're back in Gothenburg. This is the opposite side of Frihamnen, and a lot of this area is already existing here. But as a part of this very strong densification, there's also quite large buildings being built. And this is an example where a private owner, Vasakronan, who owns a lot of these buildings, want to see how can we add green structures and green qualities into an area which is basically desert. So we've been working with kind of ideas and trying to also, we're going to start cooperating with the municipality. Another yet example here is very interesting. Because there's a lot of children moving into the cities, we also have a need for a lot of schools. And the traditional, or not the traditional, but the classic planning situation is that you put a school and a preschool in different places which will need to use the park. But through a dialogue and interviews with a number of schools, we found that there's a much better way to strategically place the school, where the school in itself is really a public. This sounds very sort of basic, but it's not today in Swedish urban planning. It will become an attraction, and the park and the school will be able to be used in one. Another very concrete example is a part of Stockholm called the Royal Seaport, Norra Djurgårdsstaden. And this is an area where, from the beginning, we worked very hard with water management, trying to include biodiversity, say for different types of species. The planting is not just doing a job, but it's also very beautiful, and the accessibility is excellent in this area. Finally, 2 images. This is also one way to work. If we see there's a deficit of park, we can use guidelines to find how does it look, what should we plan for. This is from a strategic document that Stockholm is developing in trying to find how big the public spaces should be when we develop. So I think we are here now. We need to adapt and we need to act, and obviously the young people are already doing this. We as professionals are trying to do it every day, but the thing is now to step it up. Thank you.
Good afternoon to you all.